Hi, I'm Dean Johnson from Hometime. We installed our first laminate floor about 10 years ago. This product has a lot going for it. It comes in a lot of different looks. It's very durable. The installation is really fairly straightforward. Since then, we've probably installed about a dozen floors or so. I'm going to give you some tips and techniques on installing a variety of floating floor systems. We'll start off with the latest type of laminate flooring, which just snaps together. Then we'll look at the original installation system, where you glue the edges and hold them in place with straps while the glue dries. We'll go over the installation of square tiles, which use the same techniques but give you an entirely different look. And we'll look at the trim pieces, accessories, and finishing tips that will give your installation a professional look. We'll also see how the same techniques can be used for flooring made with real wood. Hometime is made possible by Chevy full-size pickup, the most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickup on the road. At Hometime, we believe the best way to get the job done is to use the finest tools.
And the Chevy Silverado is one of our favorites. Equipped with an optional Vortex 6000 V8 engine, it generates 300 horsepower and 355 foot-pounds of torque to power you through the toughest jobs.
And with an available fourth door, you've got lots of room for all your other tools.
And friends to help you use them.
At home or on the job site.
For work or play.
It's no wonder we at Hometime count on Silverado, the truck, to get the job done.
Silverado from Chevy, the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks on the road.
Well, there are a few things that make this a great product for floor installation. First of all, it's a laminate surface, very much like countertop, very durable product. And it's a photographic image that's mapped onto the surface, so they can use just about anything. It gives it a very realistic look. Comes in wide planks, so it installs very quickly. Also, it's a very seamless look. It's real hard to pick up exactly where the seams are located. Now, this floats on top of the floor. It's basically like a big laminate rug. There's an expansion gap that we leave around the entire outside of the floor, so the floor can expand and contract with different changes in temperature and humidity, which is also a good reason why you want this to acclimate in a space before installing it. Now, here's a few other things that apply to any laminate installation. It's a good idea to remove any baseboards or moldings in the room. For door jambs, you probably won't want to take those off, so you use a jam saw to cut off the bottom of the casing and jam. This way you'll be able to slip the laminate flooring underneath. You also should clean off the surface, scrape off any lumps of paint or drywall mud, fill any voids, and fix any unevenness. Depending on the type of laminate flooring you're using and the situation, you need to put down some layers of plastic or foam before you install the flooring. In basements, you'll almost always have to put down a 6 mil thick polyethylene vapor barrier. This helps keep moisture from coming up through the slab into the underside of the flooring. You may also want to spread out a cushioning underlayment. Usually this will be a roll of rubbery foam. We prefer to put this down one row at a time as we work. This particular type of laminate flooring snaps together with a locking tongue and groove joint. No glue is required. And the foam underlayment is already installed on the back side. Most manufacturers will have a product very much like this, and the installation is relatively similar. Now, the first thing that we'll want to do is take off the tongue on the pieces on the first row that go up against the wall. It's easiest to do this on a table saw, but it's also possible with the circular saw. When you cut laminate, you always want the teeth of the blade to be cutting into the surface and coming out the back side. This will give you the cleanest cut. With a table saw, you saw the flooring with the finished side up. You also need to cut the tongue off the short edge of the first piece in the first row. With a circular saw, cut the flooring with the finished side down. To get started, you also need to cut starter pieces for the second and third rows. To start the installation, you connect the first piece in the second row to the first piece in the first row. You do this a little ways out from the wall so that you can kneel on the first piece and pull the second piece towards you. When the pieces lock together, you should hear a distinct snap. Next, install the second piece in the first row. Again, the joint should snap into place. For this third piece, it helps to have something heavy holding the end of the row down. Start by putting the short ends together, leaving a small gap along the long edge. Then lift the piece up at a slight angle and pull it towards you. It should snap into place along the long seam, but don't be surprised if it takes you a little while to get the knack of doing this. Now I'm ready to measure for the last piece in the first row. I push these pieces tight up against the sidewall, putting in spacers to create a 1/4 inch expansion gap. As you measure, make sure you remember that you'll want to end up with a 1/4 inch gap between the last piece and the wall. When you're cutting this flooring, you need to think very carefully about which end you're cutting and which you're saving, especially since you'll be cutting with the finished side down. Make sure the cut end is the one that will be butting into the wall. Or another way to put it, make sure the piece you end up with has a long and a short edge that still have a tongue. Once you install the last piece in the first row, repeat the process for the last piece in the second row. Measure, making sure to leave a 1/4 inch gap. Cut, thinking carefully about which end you cut. And install the piece. Once the 2 rows are complete, you finally get to push the whole assembly up against the wall. To get a sense of how well it's going to fit, you need to put the spacers in on each side and examine how much of a gap there is between the flooring and the back wall. Often you'll find that the back wall isn't perfectly square or straight, or that it bows in the middle, leaving too large a gap. If this is the case, you'll need to scribe the back edge. It helps to put some masking tape along the back edge of the pieces in this row. Then you hold a thick pencil flat against the wall and trace the contour of the wall onto the masking tape. You can also use a drawing compass for this. Once you finish drawing the scribe, you should label the position of all the pieces and take everything apart. Now you can cut the scribe onto the pieces in the first row. It works best to use a jigsaw to cut the scribe. Once the scribe pieces are cut, reassemble everything. Again, you need to do this a couple feet out from the wall so that you kneel on the first row pieces with your back to the wall and pull the second row pieces towards you to lock them together. If everything was cut and scribed and labeled correctly, once you push it back into place and add spacers all the way around, you should have a consistent 1/4 inch gap between the flooring and the wall on all 3 sides. Now you're ready to start installing more flooring. You should begin the 3rd row with a short starter piece. By this time you should have enough room to kneel on the flooring that's already been installed and pull the pieces toward you. As with almost any flooring, it's always the first few pieces that take the longest time to install. Once you start the 3rd row, things start going a little bit faster. You'd be surprised how much real estate you're covering with just a few full pieces. The last piece in each row should be the only one you have to cut. Depending on how long it is and how close you are to the wall, you might end up using a pull bar and a tapping block to install it. Both of these accessories should be available at the same store where you buy the flooring. For the 4th row, you should be able to start off with a full piece with the tongue cut off on the short edge. You can also start later rows with scrap pieces that are left over from cutting the last piece in previous rows. These scraps will already have the tongue off, and they may help you keep the joints staggered from row to row. Now the trickiest part comes after you get the first piece down, because now as you do the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and so on, you're working with 2 sides. So once I get this first one done here, it's just a matter of lining everything up. Our floor is a little uneven here, so sometimes you just have to press up and down. You kind of develop your own tricks as you work with it. Don't get frustrated. It's just a matter of dealing with it a little bit. There we go. As you move through the job, you'll have to cut the flooring to fit around corners in the walls or obstacles or pipes. When you do this, make sure you always leave a 1/4 inch expansion gap. A little later on, we'll show you how all these get covered. When you get to the last row, where the flooring butts up against the opposite wall, you'll have to rip down a piece to the right width. Make sure that you leave room for a 1/4 inch gap. And you may also have to scribe some of these pieces. And these pieces will be particularly hard to install since you probably won't have enough room to grab in with your fingers and pull it. You'll probably have to use the pull bar to force the joint together. Well, that's the basics for a snap-together system. Now, before we start working on the finishing touches, let's take a look at what's involved in installing a system that glues together. Not all the manufacturers will have all their styles and colors in the snap-together system, so you may end up doing a glue-together one. Here's what's involved. With glue-together laminate flooring, you need to test fit the first 3 rows before you glue them together for good. You also probably need to scribe the first row to follow the contours of the wall. Once everything is cut and test fitted, you'll be able to pull it apart, roll out the underlayment, and start gluing it together. Now the way we glue these up is to put glue in the groove. You pretty much want to fill it up. Now this will vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. Some of them barely want you to put any in the groove, and then others will actually have you glue up the tongue, and that's because there are slight differences in how the tongue and groove work together, so it's really important, there you go, that you read your instructions very carefully before you do this. Of course, I always use shims when you install these things. And we have this special little tapping device here. Make certain you get a real good contact between the boards. Okay, ready for that one?
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay. And as I'm installing these, you'll see that we're going to have glue coming up between the boards, and that's really not a problem because we'll just come back later on and wipe that off. Most manufacturers expect that to happen during the installation. Okay.
Now our experience has been that the hardest part of a laminate flooring installation is just getting the first couple of rows put together. It used to be that we'd use just a tapping block, but with just a few pieces in, you start tapping too much on one, it starts to come apart someplace else. So we started using these clamping straps instead. It just clamps the pieces together and holds them nice and tight. And now would be a good time to wipe up all this excess glue.
Now we have a special method of attack we like to use for the first 3 rows. And that is, once we get one of the pieces in from each of the 3 rows, then we like to get everything clamped, and then it's time to put in the second piece of each of the rows. Okay. Now, in the process of doing this, again, we'll use our little tamper, but we don't use this a lot. This is mainly used on the very end here. So we get some real nice tight joints down the other end of the board.
When we get all 3 pieces in, now these are full pieces, so we want to make sure that we glue up both of the grooves here. Okay. Getting a little sloppy here. I'll have to wipe this off. Or if you want to grab the
That's what the rag's for, right?
Yeah. Wipe this off. Just let me get this end.
Okay.
All right. There you go.
Okay. Now we can throw this one in. And once that's down, it's time to start clamping again. Okay. There you go. Tame this a little bit. Now the trick here is once we get that clamp, so it's just about to the last couple of cranks, it's nice to hit the end row here. So again, we get a real nice tight joint down the other end. Okay.
Then we just continue this pattern all the way down to the end.
Go ahead. Pop this one on.
We've got enough glue in here.
Now when you get to the end, you can use the tapping block for nudging our board this way. But going the other way, we have to use this pull bar to get those joints nice and tight. There we go. Well, things are moving along pretty quickly now. We've gotten this accomplished in 2 hours. A dining room area like this is really pretty easy. About all we're doing is making cuts like this on the other end. Although we did have to cut out for our heat register here. When you're doing this, of course, you want to leave a 1/4 inch all the way around, and that's easily covered by the flange on the heat register once we put that in. All right.
Now, aside from that, it's pretty much wide open spaces and full boards. Now, as you can see, we're relying on these straps. Now, they extend out to 18 feet. And when you're using the straps, you want to make sure that they're nice and snug but not too tight. If the edges of the outside boards are lifting up when you're cranking on it, you're probably cranking on it too hard. Now, a couple of things that we realized when doing this is that you can get real careless with the butt joints, not get them tight enough. So we've got one person down on the end with the tapping block, and before we strap this down too much, And he just taps on that end. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
And the other person watches the joint. Yeah, that looks pretty good right there. Make sure that that's snug. And then just crank this down. That should be good right there. And you also want to make sure to get this glue up before it dries. It's a lot easier at this stage than it will be if it dries up later on. So we're just using a scrap stick, getting up all the excess, like so, and then a damp rag to wipe it down. Okay.
Well, most laminate flooring comes in shapes that are going to be similar to this, but some also come in squares. A whole different look and a little bit of a different installation technique. Take a look.
Well, here in the entryway, we're also converting the floor from vinyl to laminate. But here, we're using 16-inch square tiles. And with tiles, the installation is pretty much the same, only there are two significant differences. First of all, you need to think a little bit more about the layout. It's kind of like creating a layout for ceramic tile. You want a pleasing, balanced effect. There we go. And the other difference is that you want to use straps on every row and every column. So in other words, you're using straps in both directions. Now you'd think that you'd use more straps this way, but actually I'm going to show you a trick where you would only use 2 extra straps. Now as soon as I'm ready to clamp a new row side to side, I move up 2 rows and I take off this side to side clamp. But first, I make sure that there are spacers on both ends to keep those tiles nice and tight. Bring this over here, start clamping this down, like so. Of course, you want to make sure that the side-to-side clamps are on top of the up and down clamps so that you can get them off. Okay, go. And what makes this area so difficult is that I've got a diagonal edge going on over here that gives me nothing to clamp to. So what I did was I screwed down these wooden stops to the floor, and then I'll just use those spacers and just wedge those in there to keep those tiles nice and tight.
Whatever installation type you use, finishing off the floor is pretty much the same. There are some expansion gaps that have to be caulked, transition pieces to be added, and then base or some other type of trim applied to cover up the expansion gap. Once you've finished installing the flooring in an area, you can reinstall the baseboard around the edges. This will cover up the expansion gap between the flooring and the wall. Usually whatever trim you've removed in the first place, including standard base shoe, will be wide enough to cover the gap. Matching baseboard and base shoe is often available, so you can replace your old trim with trim that exactly matches your new flooring. A laminate floor is pretty well protected against water. It's mainly the exposed edge that you have to worry about. So in areas where we might be experiencing some water, we're going to be caulking the expansion joint. This will keep water from seeping into that edge. Plus the caulk is flexible enough so the floor can still expand and contract. So we're caulking around the dishwasher in front of the sink, and then here where the fridge is going, because we will have a water line coming in to make ice cubes, as well as some defrosting might occur over time. Now areas where you have a high moisture situation like a bathroom, there you probably just want to caulk around the entire edge of the room. Now whenever your laminate flooring butts up against a door threshold, a fireplace hearth, or something like ceramic tile, you probably need a transition piece of trim like this. This one's about 3/4 of an inch thick. It has this vertical piece that comes down that's a 1/4 inch wide. And we left a gap between our threshold and the laminate flooring of a 1/2 inch, so we'll still have a 1/4 inch gap in there, which will give us enough expansion and contraction so the floor can move just a little bit. So we just place this right along the threshold, set it into the caulk, so, and then of course the top portion here will provide the molding and the trim effect along the threshold transition. When you butt up the carpet, you need what's called a carpet reducer transition strip. Now I've already pulled out the old metal grab bar that originally held the carpet in place. Now, one thing you have to understand about carpet, when they install this, they stretch it. There's quite a bit of tension on it, and we don't want to lose that tension. So what I did is put some nails in here before I did anything. Now with the old grab bar up, I installed this new track. This is what the trim will sit in. You can see the trim has this little bit of molding here on the bottom. That will slide right into the track. Just get push it in there good and hard. Then once the trim is installed, and I'll just go back, put some carpet strips along here, and reinstall the carpet. Depending on your situation, you may need other types of transition pieces. You'll want to use a hard surface reducer if you're going from laminate to a lower surface like vinyl. This piece is called T-molding. It makes a transition between two areas of laminate flooring and a doorway. There's also a piece of nosing to use at the top of a staircase or on the treads. Laminate is one of the most durable floors we've seen. It only requires some vacuuming and an occasional damp mopping. If the flooring does get some dirt or mud, it almost always wipes clean with a damp cloth. If wax melts onto it, you'll be able to scrape it off with a soft plastic spatula. Crayon or permanent marker shouldn't be a problem. Use a rag with a little acetone. And the burn mark left by a cigarette, that also can be cleaned off with acetone. So laminate flooring is a durable material. Now the same floating floor technology that applies to laminate floors also applies to wood floors. We've used floating wood floors in some of our other projects. Take a look. Well, up here in the master bedroom, we have all the trim work done now, so we're able to move on to the floor. Now we're using these engineered wood planks. They're a ½ inch thick. We're going to be setting them on top of our radiant floor. Now these are made with 3 different layers. I don't know if you can see that or not. It makes them a lot more stable as the temperature is rising and falling on the floor, as well as the humidity.
There's still going to be some movement though, so rather than gluing or nailing, we're floating the floor on top of this foam underlayment. And we're leaving some small gaps at the walls for expansion. That's critical to prevent any buckling or separation at the glue joints.
Now with a system like this, the tongue and grooves fit very precisely, which is great for a nice fitting floor, but at the same time, if the humidity gets too high, it can be just about impossible to install. So we really recommend that you keep them in the package before you install them. And of course, like any hardwood floor, it's always great to acclimate it to the space prior to installation.
Now this underlayment is really nice since it has this little adhesive strip along the edges, so when you put it down, it'll stick rather than slide around. And it's also somewhat transparent, so you can see your guidelines as you're moving along.
On floating a wood floor like this, they always recommend that you run it parallel to the longest wall in the room. And then you don't start by laying the flooring right up against that wall. Instead, what you do is measure out one width of the flooring from the wall at a ½ inch for expansion and contraction, and then lay in a straight edge. And shim that straight edge out from the wall so it's good and solid. Then you start laying the flooring up against that. Now the reason is, if your wall isn't perfectly straight, and most walls aren't, that any undulations or anything will start showing up in your joints. By doing it this way, everything stays nice and tight, just the way you want it. I'm going to cut this away right back.
Okay.
Now, I think it's very important to realize, you want to glue up the end. Here's the glue. Whenever you're working with engineered wood flooring like this, the colors may vary slightly from box to box. So it makes a lot of sense to open up 2 boxes and then just pull every other one from each of those so that you don't end up with alternating bands of different shades as you're running across the floor. Okay. Well, hopefully this information will help you out on your floating floor project. For Hometime, I'm Dean Johnson.